Hi, I'm Russell Sturgis. I'm the founder and principal of EAP Mentor. Welcome to the next instalment in the blog series that I'm doing on the 8 principles of love, which is really about describing the underpinning philosophy of the Enhancers Awareness Program. As I indicated in the previous blog, what I'm going to be doing is exploring the Beatitudes, which was a series of 8 statements that came out of the Sermon on the Mount in the New Testament in Matthew. And if you want to know sort of how we ended up with the Beatitudes, please go back and have a look at the introduction video in this series. So the Beatitudes, as I said, was a series of 8 statements, and as I was reflecting and contemplating on the series of statements, I realised that essentially the statements were broken into two halves, if you want to call it. The first half, which was the first 4, I sort of bundled together and saw them representing what could be referred to as the journey of the dark night of the soul. And the second half, which is once again the last 4 principles, represent the journey to enlightenment. And so what this process is going through this place of what is perceivably a dark wood, if you want to call it, to honour Dante's comments, but this whole idea that we're going through this difficult journey and then coming out the other side and going through a journey of increased light or enlightenment. The experience of the dark night of the soul begins with the first Beatitude, which is blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. The Cathar basically saw this idea of poor in spirit representing somebody who had lost investment in the material world, in what they would have referred to as the world of illusion. It was this place where there was no longer the motivation, there was no longer the drive to accumulate or to encounter the things that were important in that illusionary world. And of course, those things can be summarized into 4 fundamental qualities or aspects, and power, the place where people have a sense or a need to be powerful, or the full spectrum of what power represents, right down to feeling powerless. Then you've got wealth and the need for people, and of course the drive for greed in, let's call it, this illusionary world is very evident, right through to poverty. Then we have this sense of love and the drive to be in a relationship or to be with someone who loves us, right down to what has now become probably a modern epidemic, which is loneliness. And then we've got the 4th one, which is fame, which is being acknowledged, a sense of belonging, which goes beyond an intimate relationship or a love relationship. This is that I have some value in the world, and so that goes from once again the way in which the illusionary world perceives fame, which is actors and sports people and people in industry and commerce, right down to people that we could effectively call ciphers that have no value as the world perceives it. So Poor in spirit is the experience of becoming disassociated from those four things. And the reason that we become poor in spirit through that disassociation is because they're the only things that we know that give us a sense of who we are. In other words, we establish our sense of being or worth or who we are in the world by those four benchmarks. And something happens that causes us to lose a sense of using those as our benchmarks. And there's three core things that turn up that basically bring about being poor in spirit. And these are things that are ultimately almost beyond our control. The first one is natural justice. Now, obviously, we do have some control there in that we can make choices where we avoid the experience of natural justice. But as I write about in the blog, somebody who has a penchant for uncontrolled consuming of refined carbohydrates is really setting themselves up for diabetes and obesity. Diabetes and obesity aren't a punishment. It's natural justice. It's the natural impact of having made those choices. So what happens is when we've had a lifetime of living things or living life out of balance, then we end up experiencing the consequences of that. And I would like to suggest to you that our lifestyle diseases that have now become globally epidemic are in fact a consequence of natural justice. And so what happens is we're exposed to these disease states as a result of the way in which we've aligned ourselves in terms of how we lived in the world. The second thing beyond our control is aging and death. And this whole idea that there's this, we get to the age of 50 or 60 and all of a sudden we have a meltdown because we've got to 50 years of age, and you see people go through crises as they're coming to terms with their aging. And of course, particularly in the Western world, we're watching this, once again, epidemic of aging and the need for aged care and people watching degeneration of the body and the mind and the spirit, and watching it at close quarters. And so we have this thing happening where, and of course, in order to avoid that, as a society, we typically tend to accentuate youthfulness. If you look at the media and the advertising, youthfulness, sexiness, all of those things become important and the benchmarks of what determines worth and value in the world. The third one that brings about being poor in spirit is misfortune. And that's where the wheel of fortune turns and we find our world literally getting turned upside down. And this is things like the global financial crisis. Just recently here in Australia, we've had bushfires, we've had drought, we've had flood. These are things that are beyond our control that bring about mayhem in terms of our security. Of course, there's accidents that happen that all of a sudden totally turn our lives around, divorce, you name it. There are so many things that we encounter that are perceivably out of our control that bring us to a place of suffering or being poor in spirit, as was referred to. It's kind of ironic, though, that what was being said here in this first Beatitude is that, in fact, being poor in spirit is a blessing. And the reward is this notion that you inherit the kingdom of heaven. Or probably in modern vernacular, we kind of think of that as enlightenment, this idea that we're able to come to this place of expanded awareness, this place of divine peace, if you want to call it that. So what we end up with is a crisis of values that is in fact resulting people being poor in spirit. And it's this whole idea that all of the things that we perceive to be as important and valuable as being taken away from us. And of course, one of the things that has been created in society to try and lessen the impact of that is insurance. And so what we have is we have health insurance, we have home and contents insurance, we have accidents insurance, we have employment insurance. So what we've got are all of these insurance options that help to reduce the impact of having to experience being poor in spirit. But it would seem that insurance becomes one of the ways that we stop inheriting the kingdom of heaven. It actually stops us. It keeps us invested in the world and stops us from exploring and going on to consider this idea that there's another reality. Of course, what happens is as we begin to empty our cup of the values that were associated with the world, we present moving into, through this dark night of the soul experience, a place where we get to fill our cup with a whole new set of values. And so I don't keep you sort of sitting on the edge of your seat until later on. Those values include things like, and these are the things that then become important to you. So you replace wealth, power, love and fame with kindness and compassion and empathy and inner peace. And all of a sudden, these become the things with which you want to fill your cup. And but in order to be able to see that as an opportunity, and these are the things that move us towards the kingdom of heaven or enlightenment, we have to first remove our attachment to these other things that exist within the illusionary world. And the first step in that is that we have to become poor in spirit. So ultimately, the experience of natural justice, the experience of aging and the prospect of death, and the experience of misfortune are in fact our friends. They're the gifts that we're given that bring us to this point where we're able to consider the possibility that there could be something else. And of course, what happens is that this place of being poor in spirit is effectively grief, because we're in this place where we're still attached to those things that we've lost because we haven't fully understood what this new reality looks like. And yet we're in this place where the only reality that we've known is still there. It's still raw. It's still in our face. We're still a part of it. Yet we're in this place where we've been forced to have to let go of these things. And of course, our sustained state of grief results in things like depression. It results in compassion fatigue. It results in burnout, lifestyle diseases. All of these things are a consequence of being in this place. And of course, invariably, when we first go into this place, we experience dis-ease. But when we stay stuck in this place because we don't know where else to go, we then begin to experience disease. And these are the things, the diseases are those things that I just listed. So the Enhancers Awareness Program, based on the Beatitudes, is about a reformulation of these 8 statements that came from the Sermon on the Mount and putting it into modern vernacular. It's about a sequential journey of being able to recalibrate your awareness and consciousness so that instead of being aligned with the values of this illusionary world, you start to identify and adopt a whole new set of values that help you move towards a state of enlightenment. So the first part of our work is an opportunity to look really closely at what's going on in your world. We have one of our core principles of the Enhancers Awareness Program says you can't change what you can't see. So the very first thing that we get you to do is to look really closely at what it is that's going on in your world. And so we have you do a really lovely non-judgmental process, and a process with that expectation of having you look closely at who you are physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. And in this context, spiritual is what you're motivated, what you're driven by. And it's a real beautiful opportunity to, first of all, identify your current state of consciousness and from an objective place, have a look at how that's impacting on you. And we get to look at that in a couple of different ways, but it's a really lovely, honest way of being able to identify what your reality is. And so that is the essence of the first beatitude. Being poor in spirit, being in that place of grief, is a necessary component to then moving on in the journey. And of course, what you're going to find out is that the next beatitude is blessed are those that mourn, for they shall be comforted. So what we have is this sense that there's a difference between grieving and mourning, and in the next blog I'm going to describe that. And the gift of being able to move to this place of mourning is the gift of comfort. In other words, that there's relief from the suffering that's associated with being poor in spirit. I hope you find these things informative. If you'd like to know more about the Enhancers Awareness Program and the work that we do there, please go to EAP Mentor. You might like to speak to one of our mentors about doing the booklet. The booklet is a really lovely short program that we can do with people to help them identify their state of poor in spirit. And it's a really lovely way of being able to assess who you are and what's going on in your experience. And so I would invite you to speak to one of our mentors who you'll find listed on our webpage. We have a fantastic Facebook page, which is Enhancers Awareness Program. We have a Mindful Living magazine, which is an online magazine which comes out once a month, which you can subscribe to. Please, if you're interested in any of this, please pursue that. And thank you for coming and listening to this. And I look forward to speaking to you in this 8-series process on the principles of love and the underpinning philosophy of the Enhancers Awareness Program. Speak to you again soon. Bye.